All right, looks like we're live. Hello, everybody. My name is Steve Phillips. I'm the project manager of the Pursuance Project, started by Barrett Brown, who we'll be hearing from in just a moment. I just wanted to give people an overview of kind of the structure of the event that we're having right now. So this is the first live YouTube Live AMA Ask Me Anything session that Barrett Brown is doing related to the Pursuance Project. So I'm going to read you a bit of Barrett's background for the very small number of people who are not familiar with Barrett or could use a refresher on his very interesting backstory that has led to today. So Barrett Brown was a freelance writer for Vanity Fair, The Guardian, Skeptic, and Huffington Post when he was invited to assist a faction of Anonymous that was assisting with the Tunisian Revolution. Shortly afterwards, Anonymous hackers stole 70,000 emails from an intelligence contracting firm that had put him and others under surveillance, thus exposing the Team Themis conspiracy, whereby Palantir, HB Gary Federal, and other firms with black propaganda capabilities had proposed hacking, disinformation, intimidation of activists like Code Pink, as well as WikiLeaks, and even its supporters, including Glenn Greenwald. Skipping ahead, later, because of what Barrett did with Project PM, involving this crowdsourced investigative journalism project, which he transformed Project PM into to uncover what was in those 70,000 emails. Eventually, the FBI raided Barrett's home and his mom's house. The search warrant listing the website and the group as subjects of interest. So later, Barrett was charged with 11 counts of aggravated identity theft for having copied and pasted a link from one chat room to another that he thought had contained more emails exposing corruption, but in fact included credit cards. So that they claimed that Barrett was conspiring to use this information for personal gain without the evidence. There are several documentaries covering much of this, including Hacker Wars, We Are Legion, and Alex Winter's 18-minute film, Relatively Free, as well as some articles at Who, What, Why, and The Nation describing the other plots that Barrett and others uncovered and documented. While imprisoned, Barrett continued writing, called the Barrett Brown Review of Arts and Letters in Prison, which was picked up by The Intercept, and for which he won the National Magazine Award for his columns in 2016. So just this past November, Barrett was released from prison and has been working on the Pursuance system, which we're here to hear from Barrett about today. He says the goal is to build up a cohesive yet agile network of opposition to criminalized institutions, while also helping activists and nonprofits to cooperate more efficiently. And with that, I will hand it over to Barrett, who's going to make some introductory remarks, and then I'll ask him some intro questions, and then we will get directly to your questions after that. So you can use the hashtag Pursuance on Twitter if you want to tweet about this, and on YouTube Live, please submit your questions there, and we will get to as many as we can. And with that, take it away, Barrett.
Thank you. I'm Barrett Brown. The reason that we are putting our energies and thought into this project is because the world is broken, the US government is broken, the institutions surrounding the US government, including the press, are broken and cannot be repaired from within. They must be reformed and or replaced as appropriate from without. We also happen to note there are some tactics that have been tested out over the last 15 years, particularly the last 8 years, that have worked to some degree, even when they should not have worked, even when they were done very haphazardly, using makeshift infrastructure, IRC chat rooms, message boards, troll groups that evolved into activist groups. We've seen a lot of amazing things over the past 10 years, and I've managed to see a lot of these things up close and participate in them. Over the course of running a group called Project PM, we conducted a very successful crowdsourced investigation operation into the intelligence contracting industry, the private public intelligence sector that conducts espionage and other black operations for companies and for governments, including dictatorships abroad. And we have, over the years, managed to learn some lessons about how this works, how it can work better. And we've been able to, since then, build up a system, a framework that we have distributed quietly over the past almost a year since my release, and which has managed to impress enough people that we have been able to set up a board of directors and a sort of peripheral network of supporters capable of building this system and launching it as it will happen in the next few months. The board of directors includes Jay Lederman, the activist lawyer, includes Russ Baker, the Columbia journalism board member, author of a very good book on the Bush family and founder of Who, What, Why, former New Yorker contributor. Mano Singham, professor of Case Western University. Robert Tynes, professor at Bard University, Bard College. John Kiriakou, a CIA leaker who blew the whistle on the CIA's torture program and went to prison for it. And other figures, Brigitte Johnsditter, the former WikiLeaks participant who went on to lead the Pirate Party in Iceland to a pretty impressive electoral result recently as a member of parliament there. These are all people who have looked at this framework and looked at the resources we have together on this and have agreed that this is the best way forward. So the basic framework, if you have not seen it, can be seen at pursuanceproject.org. There's a little presentation with diagrams explaining what it is that we're putting together. It's a system of sort of a universe, an ecosystem of collaboration in which everyone who is brought in is able to form pursuance, an entity, and can grow it however they like. So most of you who are watching this, I'm assuming, are already basically familiar with this. And there's been a number of questions that we've answered at different spots, and we want to answer more of them sort of all at once so that we can present this later on and make sure that everyone is on the same page about what this is and what it isn't and what we expect it to do over time. The short version is that we expect this to grow and to refine itself using several different mechanisms at different layers that will essentially result in a sort of a creature that expands, that brings on more people without being over encumbered, that stays agile even as it grows larger and larger, which is constantly refining itself, refining its own capabilities with little organs, such like developing better and better manners of combining the energies and time of the world's serious citizens who are opposed to corruption, opposed to state overreach, opposed to tyranny, putting their energies together in a way that makes sense, that takes full advantage of those energies, and applies them over and over again in confrontations with states and other institutions until such time as things change. That, again, is the overview. That's what we expect to happen. The specifics are going to be hard to predict. We're going to have a number of different people building different groups for different purposes, but they will all have agreed to a basic ideological framework to come in. That framework requires simply that you oppose the police state as you understand it. You oppose the national security state as you understand it. And you oppose the drug war as you understand it. Beyond that, we don't ask for agreements on any other issues. There is obviously a constituency, a global constituency that exists that agrees on a number of things that essentially all reasonable people agree with, but that nonetheless have very little traction in the society, in the civic structures we've inherited through history for a number of reasons. So the purpose of this is to get things moving again. It's to rekindle the adventurism, frankly, the strength and the courage that we've seen in past generations who have brought us all of the freedoms that we still enjoy. It's a means of being able to pay back what we've received and to ensure that future generations don't go through the same things that some of us are going through right now. With that, I'll begin taking questions, which Steve Phillips is providing to me from questions that have been sent via Twitter and right now in other venues. Number one, what are the individual components and features of the Pursuance Project, chat, video, etc.? The basic framework of an individual pursuance within this system is a grouping, a sort of a relationship machine that grows by the numbers. It grows on an ad hoc basis, with each person who comes on being entirely cognizant of what his relationship is with the system, what it does, what its procedures are, what it will and won't do tactically, et cetera, et cetera. It's something that's a lot more straightforward, a lot more visible to participants than, say, a amorphous group where there's no mechanism for decisions to be made. To that end, we have the basic structure whereby people who join a group interact based on their position in the group with those who have brought them on. Beyond that, we do have so there's a messaging system essentially. You visualize these structures that are set up a certain way, and people the basic framework for the interaction there is sending messages back and forth to the system, whether those be requests for something to be done or researched, or whether these be submissions upwards to the core creators of the system, data, projects they've been asked to do, etc., ideas. And again, that's laid out much better than we can really convey here on the pursuanceproject.org. Beyond that, there is a chat program called Leap Chat that's being developed largely for this system. It's a zero knowledge system that allows for maximum security. There are a number of tools, including Transparency Toolkit, which was a sort of award-winning project used for collating information on, in large part, the intelligence contracting industry. That'll be sort of integrated into it. You'll have another number of other applications that will add down the line, but the basic system that'll be released will have just the functionality that we think is most necessary for activism. Chat, sending messages back and forth, etc. But again, over time, there's going to be a number of things that we'll put in, and there's also going to be ways for people to integrate additional tools into their individual pursuances. Number two, can you give us some examples of projects which benefit from this type of platform? The best example that I have on hand, and one where we kind of use as a test case, prison reform. Let's say you want to reform prisons in the U.S. and you know the difficulties that is sort of encountered by that. You know that the press has difficulty in covering prisons even when they pay attention to them. You also know that journalists, to the extent that you make things easy for them, are much more likely to cover something. So you start a pursuance for prison reform, and you bring on somebody to do research, and you bring on somebody to deal with the press themselves. The press guy, creates a package. He creates a package for journalists explaining, or for journalists explaining how the administrative remedy system works, how inmates file complaints, for instance, and how they can access them. Meanwhile, the public relations guy or the research guy brings on people under him. So he brings on whoever he wants who's in the system to take these roles, and each of them are tasked with, one of them might be tasked, or one whole strain of participants may be tasked with identifying prisons in the country, and then identifying press outlets in those regions, and then compiling that data and presenting and sending them back up the line. Someone else might be tasked with, or again, a whole line of people might be tasked with finding actual issues that have already been discovered but reported upon by minor press outlets or reform groups, so that you can send ready-made stories, tips to journalists as well. So this structure grows up, and the basic purpose of this structure is that it provides a framework whereby people can very quickly set up whatever their idea might be, and easily bring people onto it in a way where everyone is on the same page as to who's doing what and why. And that also allows for collaboration with other pursuances. So going back to this example, the prison reform group, at some point it might want to do a visual campaign, little images to be sent around to social networks, either raising money or asking for more volunteers or bringing attention to a particular issue. And so within the pursuance system, within the ecosystem, they'll have other pursuances available to them, other groups that specialize in just doing one or another thing, whether it be visual propaganda, coding, research, etc. And they will form an attachment with that group, a temporary attachment, and that group, will provide them with whatever they need. This kind of thing happens already. You already have people sort of loosely based on Facebook or whatever, where there's people who are known among activists as, I can do this, I'd be happy to do that for you. It happened with an anonymous, there are people who hung around the chat room saying, yeah, I can create this for you, and people knew to go to them. This makes this a lot more efficient. In addition to all the other sort of functionality and all the other reasons that we've discussed in the main presentation. So there's research, there's activism, crowdsourced journalism is a big part of it. We're going to be bringing on journalists and helping them bring on a crowdsourced network of people, with different skill sets and backgrounds who are interested in sending tips to a journalist or helping him research particular subjects. Again, in a way that's going to be a lot more effective than how journalism is normally done these days, which is certainly a journalist who goes to a couple of sources who may or may not be telling him the truth, or may or may not be giving him the full picture of things he needs to know. Whereas we found that crowdsourcing, whether it be done informally or formally, tends to bring up more data to be considered. And if you set it up correctly, as these will, you set it up in a certain way whereby each level of contributors is answering to a higher, upper level, and so on. The journalist doesn't have to risk, having to suddenly have him be talking to 100 people. He's just talking to the 2 people or 3 people that he brought on under him to handle all this. So it makes sense for him. It diminishes the risks, or kind of the cost that a journalist would consider being the case when thinking about crowdsourcing. It also normalizes it. It makes it a common thing. It makes it an easy thing. And it gives people who right now don't really, collectively have access to lots of information that should be in the public eye, gives them an ability to bring that information more thoroughly into the public eye, very directly through journalists themselves. But there are a whole range of things that can be done. Some of them we've thought of in general, others will think of. But everything that can be done right now by a nonprofit or an NGO can be done better within this system, without changing anything within that group. They can maintain their brick and mortar operations, but also create a pursuance presence in order to better energize, better make use of their supporters, or those who would like to support them, but there's no means of doing so as of yet. They can also better collaborate amongst themselves, groups and nonprofits. They can find efficiencies more easily because they're all present in the system. Everything that's done by activists, whether they be traditional activists or the sort of online activists that we've seen over the last 10 years, things like campaigns against SOPA, a lot of the direct research that was done into governments and all that kind of thing, whistleblowing can be more easily facilitated with groups like these. There will be pursuances that become well known for being able to handle large amounts of data, and people will start going to those, just like they used to go to WikiLeaks or The Intercept. Anything you can imagine that needs to be done on a civic basis can be done here more quickly and efficiently, and in a way that better brings talent or particular skills to the people who have the ideas. Number 3, why do your team have such a sense of urgency in building Pursuance? Well, we didn't used to. This is something I started thinking about back in 2009, and presented sort of a basic version of this back in 2010. And then I got involved with Anonymous, and things accelerated, and then went to prison, and then I got out, and suddenly we had President Trump. And we have institutional deterioration beyond even what I expected, frankly. But at the same time, even if there was nothing going on right now, the fact of the matter is, to take the U.S. as an example, although this is not a strictly American system, the U.S. is a country in which tens of millions of Americans are technically criminals and subject to arrest and incarceration because of drug laws and gambling and prostitution laws and that sort of thing. This country has criminalized tens of millions of its own people and can only continue to exist as a country and not a gulag state to the extent that its laws are not enforced. We've seen too many people in government get away with too much, and we've seen too many people crushed outside of government, and we've seen no mechanism by which this is really rectified for the most part. Ideally, the press reports on something, and the press will always find out what horrible things are going on, and then report them, and then the American people, being good and productive, will write their congressman, and the congressman like, oh my gosh, something horrible has happened, and they will rectify it. In reality, that almost never happens. So the difference between the civic ideology on which even relatively humane, relatively free Western countries is based on, has very little connection to what actually happens due to the problems with the system. So given that, and given that there has been some deterioration in terms of the relationship between the state and people for the most part over the last decades, given how silly things have gotten, given how bad the press has gotten at doing just basic things that it was able to do a few decades ago, there doesn't seem to be any conclusion other than that if left to their own devices, the establishment and the counter-establishment, even the people who claim they're not part of the establishment and now run the White House, will bring things to a disastrous end. And we meanwhile have many people who are essentially technocrats, people who are educated, well informed, who care about what the facts are, who care about what the truth is, are interested in actually finding out things rather than establishing an ideology and then moving from there and making all facts fit into it. People who care about the rights of others. And we want those people to be collated into an entity whereby they're still independent, but they have the option at any given time of making as many alliances as they want with other people who want to work with them. The enemy is organized. The entrenched system of criminalized nation states is very organized. And this has to be organized too. And so we wanted to figure out a system that would still allow for independence, that would not have a central leadership, that wouldn't have anything that would, make it less agile and less of a moral alternative to the system, because that's what we're trying to create here. We're trying to create something that people will look at in the way that, in better days, some people looked at their countries as something they believe in. Right now, you are forced into a polity with your neighbor, and your neighbor may or may not be a fascist. Depending on where you live in the US, he probably is. Here, in the internet, you have the option for the first time in human history to collaborate with who you want to and build a polity with them. Identify your loyalty with groups that you form and that you join. When people start to understand that, people start to see it, as they will when this system is launched, we're going to see a shift of imagination. The imagination will be focused on what else can we do now that we can do this. Number 4. How will you prevent infiltration of the project by those seeking to block the endeavor? The way this project is populated, it provides half of the answer to that question. We start by populating the ecosystem with people that we've chosen out of those who applied. We're picking these people, obviously, we're making a value judgment in doing so. Obviously, we're going to put people in that we think can be depended upon to bring on other good people, and who, again, share our opposition to certain things that we think are fundamentally wrong. Police state, drug war, surveillance state, that sort of thing. From there, they bring on people. Everyone who's brought onto the system has the right to bring on some other people to the system. We don't know the exact parameters of that, whether or not, for instance, you'll be allowed to bring on 5 people, 10 people, unlimited. Probably we're going to experiment with that. You'll be able to bring on some people, and then that right could be renewed. You'll be able to bring on 10 people more, like 2 months later. We'll see. But at any rate, starting with a certain population, you've already kind of determined to some extent how that population is going to, what it's going to consist of. You can never control everyone who gets in down the line. Bobby's a great guy, but Susie is nuts, and Susie's friend Kathy is a fascist. Kathy might get in, but once Kathy's gotten in, she still has to join a pursuance. She still has to be accepted into one in order to cause a ruckus. Now, Kathy can create her own pursuance dedicated to advancing the cause of anti-Mexican sentiment, but she's going to have very few takers in something that's by and large is populated by decent people. So that's one area of that. The other answer, the other solution to that problem is that the way that a pursuance grows, unlike an IRC chat room, like anonymous use, where everyone's flooding in to a single chat room and everyone has the same ability to either work on things or provide ideas for projects, or contrarily to engage in drama or to spy on them because they're an intelligence contractor or an FBI agent. With this system, someone starts a pursuance, they build outwards from the pursuance core. And as people join, they're on the margins, they're on the outside. So to the extent they prove to be capable, they can be brought up closer to the system. But to the extent that someone is brought on, they're being brought on by somebody else. And that's the only person they're connected to at that point. Until such time as somebody else forges a connection with them. That person, if they want to wreak havoc or whatever, all they're able to do is send messages or work with that person who brought them on, who of course can pick them off at any given time from that pursuance. So that right there, again, we're not going to solve every problem that could come up, either in terms of the dynamics of activist groups where there's drama and whatnot, or in terms of infiltration. But that does cut down on a lot of it. It makes it much harder for people like Aaron Barr of HB Gary, or for the FBI or for Interpol to come in and surveil lawful activists, as they have been in the habit of doing for a number of years. Down the line, individual pursuances, there'll be a lot of options that they can pick that can, in terms of security, in terms of how much of what they do is readily presentable to others. Some pursuances will find it necessary to keep their activities very much on the down low, so that the corporations that they're opposing won't be able to do the kind of things that we saw them do with Team Themis, illegally surveil them, hire people to harass them, etc. We know that these institutions do this. We know they have no reason not to, since when they get caught, there are no consequences for them. So that's definitely a concern for some groups. I think, but a lot of groups, a lot of the people who will be using this are going to be pretty mainstream, actually, and generally don't have a lot of problems with surveillance. The targets they're going after, the issues, don't necessarily have a cogent sort of enforcing group that goes after activists and journalists and pursues them. But each pursuance will have the option to decide how they want to handle these things. Number 5, what's the initial model for moderating for good faith participation? Peer moderation, hierarchy, contributory responsibilities. There are a number of models that an individual pursuance can use. The default setting, as shown on the main presentation, shown on the framework presentation at pursuanceproject.org, it kind of shows how the moderation is kind of something that's done by the structure itself. As in, moderation is something that's done on a point-to-point basis between individuals. Someone who creates a group can set it however he likes to, in terms of what the tone is and in terms of what's expected of those who join. And he delegates control generally. Most pursuances, will have a guy who founds it, and he may immediately put 2 or 3 other people in with him with the same amount of control over how it grows as he does. A more democratic pursuance. Others won't. Others will create a pursuance, and they'll bring on people onto them, and people who are willing to work in a pursuance like that, and there'll be combinations of those structures. So all of these questions that come up about participation, moderation, hierarchy, those are things that are sort of encoded organically on the pursuance level. People will create pursuances and that are democratic, and those are the kind of pursuances that some are going to want to join. Some people aren't going to want to be under anybody. Some will create a more regimented structure where you're getting orders from the top and you're carrying them out. And obviously, if you're not interested in doing that, you can not join it or leave and create your own, doing similar tasks but in a different way. But that cuts down on a lot of the sort of philosophizing and the legitimate but sometimes cumbersome debates that occur when you have no framework for authority, as is often the case in movements that come together very haphazardly on the internet or elsewhere. And so these are things that, again, are going to be addressed by you, as you work. We have a task management system that we're creating for this, which is also somewhat, we think more advanced than what currently exists. And we've looked at what's out there, what corporations use, what companies are out there that offer that kind of thing to companies, organizations. What we have, we think, is better in general and definitely better for activism. It allows you to break up work into small pieces and to assign them, or to, if you will, have them so that people can choose to work on particular pieces. There's a number of ways in which, to determine, whether this has been done complete, if a task has been completed, or if it just looks completed, if it's been done right or wrong. Those are all things that, are determined within the pursuance, within those settings. So there's any number of ways to have, if you'd like, a pretty haphazard and informal pursuance where someone's creating tasks and saying, hey, do this, and you kind of expect, depend upon people in the pursuance to do them, and just, when they're done, it automatically is implemented. Other systems, can be done whereby someone has to approve each finished task and say, yeah, this is really finished. Again, these are all things that will differ from pursuance to pursuance. And of course, I should reiterate that, regardless of how different 2 pursuances are in terms of how they're run and what they do, the system encourages them to work together. The pursuances will form links and share information, share tasks, share resources, that sort of thing. Again, without giving up their independence, without giving up their ability to run things however they like. The system kind of encourages that sort of behavior, because eventually what we want is superorganisms. We want activist superorganisms composed of very refined individual pursuances that have been figuring out better and better ways to do very narrow tasks, and then forming alliances with other pursuances that are doing other things, but for a similar end, and then eventually setting up something that can respond like an organism would respond to necessary points of conflict around the world. That's essentially what a government is. This is different though. This is a shadow government essentially. Number 6. Is there an ideological umbrella for the organization? Socialist plus capitalist mix, statement of ideals, goals, prelude to the Constitution. So, as I noted earlier, there is a very broad framework of agreements that one has to agree to when coming into the system. It's opposition to police states, opposition to the drug war, opposition to the surveillance states. We don't quibble over the definitions of those things, where this is basically just in place so that people know that this is not a content neutral system, that those of us who have created it, and many of those, pretty much all of those who come in initially, are going to be of a similar mind on those issues. Beyond that, you will have socialists and communists and anarcho-capitalists, old-fashioned regular old capitalists, and people with no economic views whatsoever, working either amongst themselves or with each other in different pursuances, sometimes in the same pursuance, because there's obviously a great many of the most pressing problems are those that can be agreed upon pretty readily by everyone on that spectrum. Everyone who's not a fool or a crook agrees that drugs should be legalized, so on and so forth. So we want to kind of encourage the idea this is something between a political party and a union. It's something in which there's a broad allowance for disagreements, but everyone has enough in common in terms of how they view the world that there should be plenty of alliance, plenty of potential for alliance within the system on an individual basis and on the basis of pursuances working together. Let's see, number 7. So in part, you're basically offering project management interface. So far, all your examples are politically based. Is that a rule, or is this interface usable for any project? The ecosystem that we're presiding over, the main instance of this pursuance system, is a activist-oriented system. It's intended for people who are interested in being involved in civic collaboration, in activism and journalism of different sorts, and experimenting with those things. Beyond that, the system itself could just as easily work for a company or a hobbyist group or anything to organize their affairs. It's very robust, it's very universal and scalable. So to that end, in order to help fund all the expenses that will come up as things proceed, we're going to be offering this system for use to companies. We believe companies that we will veto if we don't want them involved, but and then provide them assistance with it, just as a way of having this being self-funded. But in general, yes, the people within the main pursuance, within this main instance of it, because anybody can use this open source software and run their own server and run a ecosystem that'll be empty, and then 5 people come in and build a Dungeons and Dragons society if they'd like. And any company can use it themselves, but we'll be offering assistance to those companies who are willing to pay for it in order to fund this. Number 8. What is process democracy? That's a term I coined to describe the differences between this pursuance system and institutional democracy. It's set up to be compared and contrasted to institutional democracy. Institutional democracy begins with a certain number of people making some arbitrary decisions. In the case of the U.S., it was a number of people who have been voted by what we would call a regular means, voted in by a portion of the population, white, free, property-owning males, and then sent to an assembly, and then they create a constitution, and there's a whole big process involving that. But at some point early on in the process, arbitrary authority gets wrapped up in it. It exposes itself to difficult questions. We want to have something that does not expose itself to difficult questions. We want to have something where Everyone has the same right to create the structure. Everyone has the same right to develop it and to decide how it goes and to delegate powers necessary. But the power is legitimate because it's the power of something they started. To the extent they want to delegate it more and more, they can do so. To the extent they, want to micromanage every decision that's made and decide who can come in all the way down the line, even as it becomes a large pursuance with 1,000 people, they can do that if they'd like, although we wouldn't suggest it. But the bottom line is that at every step of the way, you are part of a pursuance because you've joined it. And you can leave the pursuance at any time and start your own. That's very different from the model that the West has kind of been forced to use in a way. We're talking about land-based nation states. There's always going to be a degree of arbitrary authority there, or not always, but there has been, and for reasons that I'm sympathetic to, and everyone should be. But likewise, and of course, they're inheriting a lot of baggage in terms of previous agreements that were not made in a sort of a idealistic social contract sense, because there is no social contract really. So this is something that is more. It's more process-based, for instance. It's something that works in a sort of evolution of agreements between individuals, and it's something that every step of the way you can point to it and say, "This was why this was done, and here's what my authority was to do this." That's different from our current institutions, and hopefully this general idea, which is already kind of in the air and has been for a while, will, as people see it in practice, they'll develop their own sort of methods by which this kind of thing can be expanded into actual governance. And countries like Iceland, in fact, might very well do that. Of course, like I said, we do have a member of parliament, head of the Pirate Party, Virginia Johnson, on our board of directors. And Iceland is a country where they've been willing to experiment with democracy. A country where they in some form or another have had what is arguably democracy for a long time. Other countries as well, I think, over the next several decades, will also look into realizing that promise we had back in the 90s of more direct, more efficient internet-based democracy. And this is kind of a stepping stone towards that. Number 9, I see a Bitcoin address at pursuanceproject.org. Should we donate to that to support your work? Yes. Right now, we don't have any income coming in from any sources. We're applying for grants from different foundations, so we'll be able to cover our expenses. Right now, the main expense is we have a project manager, Steve Phillips, who's very, very talented and has a very great command over the skill sets needed for this. And he's working on this in part full time when we can pay him. So I paid him out of pocket a couple months ago, but I'm not able to do that right now anymore. So to the extent that we can get donations to help him so he can spend more time on this and less time having to do his own projects, on a freelance basis, that obviously helps to get us to fruition. Over time, we'll have some more, a little bit more efficient means of bringing in donations, like Kickstarter and whatever else we set up. And then, more long term, we expect to have, we expect to be able to, stop asking for money and, just bring it in from clients and all that. But so yes, please do, if you have a Bitcoin to spare for a cup of coffee, please do send it to that address. Let's see. So see if we have any more questions right now.
Yeah. So Barrett, there's a couple sort of technical related questions and some things that that might be good for me to tackle that kind of build on some of the stuff that you were saying, in addition to some other things. So if you don't mind, there's a couple things here, and then we'll transition back to Barrett after and ask some other questions. If you do have questions, please send them in. We have some great ones so far, obviously, but we're still taking them. So to build on what Barrett was saying about someone asked about the individual components of the pursuance system, right? So talking about chat and so on. So to be clear, in addition to the chat things and some of the task management that Barrett was alluding to, right? So like big picture, someone should be able to create a pursuance, specify what the mission of that pursuance is, have ideas for specific tasks that form a sort of strategy for what should be done to achieve the mission of that pursuance. You can invite people. You could choose up front to make that pursuance private, that means that all of the information in that pursuance will be encrypted so that not even we can see it, even though it's, even if you're collaborating through our server, right? So between like chat messages and tasks and strategies and links that people share and files that people share through the pursuance system, if you choose to create a private pursuance, all of that will be encrypted end to end. That means that it's encrypted on your device, and it doesn't get decrypted until it's being viewed by somebody that you're in that pursuance with that has permission to see that content. So that's kind of an overview of the fundamental thing you should be able to do. The task management is unique and is an important part of the system, and that is because in order to enable very powerful and fine-grained collaboration between people, you need to be able to say, here's the big picture, here's what we're doing, we're going to break this up into pieces, assign different pieces to different people, but it's all these aligned people, as Barrett was saying, right? You're only in the pursuance if you were invited. People can be, can be kicked out if they start, if the creator of the pursuance or someone that they make an admin, thinks that they're being disruptive. As Barrett was saying, it was problematic to not be able to do that with Anonymous when you just have one giant IRC chat room, and if nobody is any sort of admin, that can cause a bunch of problems. So somewhat also when relatedly and to the technical parts, there's another question saying, how do you prevent infiltration? Another detail that's important to point out is you will be able to create a task and sort of assign it to another pursuance. So it's almost like outsourcing something to another group. If you want to leverage the expertise of a different pursuance, you should be able to do that. So one additional advantage above and beyond is kind of playing the strengths of everyone within pursuance. Another advantage is just the fact of you're sort of breaking things up into cells, you see? So each pursuance can, on the technical side, each pursuance is kind of encrypted with its own separate key. So if someone has access to one pursuance, if somebody appears to be a legit activist and they manage to get an invite to a pursuance, that doesn't mean that they have access to any of the other pursuances or that they can see any of the pursuances. That doesn't mean they can see any of the plans that or any of the ideas or messages or whatever from any of the other pursuances. Even if those pursuances are all collaborating with the one that this person does have access to, if that makes sense. So being able to break things up into different pursuances that can still collaborate, but just by having one malicious person get in to one pursuance, they can only see what's in that pursuance. They can't see other things in the other pursuances. Another thing that we recently figured out is having a fine-grained permission system, so that even in a pursuance, if there's someone you're just kind of trying out, maybe you don't, fully trust them yet, if you can invite them to a pursuance and give them very limited capabilities, in terms of what they can work on, and also in capabilities in terms of what they can see. So being able to say, okay, here's these 2 tasks. I'm going to assign them to this new person. I don't want them to be able to see anything else. We'll see how that goes. So that's another way to kind of limit some of the sort of damage that can be done by someone coming in that does not have good intent. So we got a couple software-related questions from the one and only John Draper, also known as Captain Crunch. He's one of the original hackers. He and others were sort of hacking phone systems back in the day. They figured out that if you make certain sounds and you kind of play those sounds into a phone, for example, into a payphone, that instead of having to put money in, you can actually make free phone calls. So there's so Captain Crunch is called Captain Crunch because he used a Captain Crunch whistle, like a plastic whistle, in a Captain Crunch cereal box that was just at the right frequency to be able to make the sounds that you need in order to make these phone calls. So it's pretty awesome stuff. So we're happy to have him as a supporter. One of Captain Crunch's questions is it your intention to open source code for the fundamental security / backbone of the project? Yes, all of Pursuance is open source. Later, once we can afford to, or if we can get a sponsor, then we'll do a full code audit once once we've launched, once things are fully there so that the code is there, so that more of the code is there to audit it. I should say that already we have kind of a different pieces of the Pursuance system that are built out. One, Barrett mentioned earlier, that's called Leap Chat. Right now, anyone in the world can go to leap.org and have an end-to-end encrypted chat session. We will be like integrating these tools more and more into Pursuance as we go along. But yes, all of these are open source using the AGPL license for those who are curious. Another question from Captain Crunch: is it your intention to make use of other technologies like Jitsi, or will you make your own encrypted tools? So as Barrett has mentioned in a couple other previous interviews, when there are good tools that we can just use and we can just integrate them, or if it's easy just to kind of link people to, say, like a video chat session or something from a Pursuance, if they want to use that, that's fine. The custom stuff that we're doing is Leap Chat, which again is at leapchat.org. And we're continuing to regularly add features to it. And then the project management, kind of task management, having fine-grained, kind of specific things that people are doing to enable this complex coordination. In addition to, I should mention, sort of gamification features, so that people should be very excited and feel like they're part of this epic movement when they're doing this sort of activism or whatever they want to do with their Pursuance. So enable people to kind of appreciate each other's work and get credit for the work that they do using a sort of points system, in addition to being able to kind of kind of thumbs up and react to other people's actions to say that you approve of it and to encourage each other. So that should be great. So the short answer is we're building new stuff when it is unique, and over time we will integrate more tools. And there's some things where it's just as easy to have like one browser tab open where you're using some tool, and if there's no good way to integrate that, no way that makes sense to integrate that tightly with Pursuance, then it makes sense just to leave that as a separate tool. So somebody asked, do you think that gathering all these thoughts into a single space could backfire? So that's a good question. So related to kind of the structure of Pursuance, I should say, kind of big picture wise, initially we will launch, and we're currently working on a web version of Pursuance. So it will work well on desktop and on mobile. So first it'll be a web application. Later we will do native like desktop and mobile apps, meaning that you like download and install them onto your device. But we're going to start off with web. Another aspect of this, when someone's talking about this kind of centralization, so because all of our code is open source, anyone in the world can create, we're able to set up their own instance of the Pursuance system software. So we will have our own, like what we expect to be kind of one of the main ones, probably the main one for a while, at pursuanceproject.org. If other people want to set up their own Pursuance system instances on other servers, on their own servers, it could be, behind the firewall. They could make stuff public if they want, and then of course all these Pursuances and servers and whatnot are invite only still. But so being able to set up your own instance is something that we're enabling. In the future, we will have federation. That means that these different Pursuance system servers will be able to, like different people will be able to collaborate through different servers. So one person can be on the pursuanceproject.org server. Someone else will be able to join a different Pursuance system server. And then those people will be able to collaborate between servers as if they're using the same server. So that helps to decentralize this a bit, so that even if like any particular server, something happens to it, like the people hosting the data get raided, or some crazy stuff happens, which when Barrett Brown is involved, you never know what the authorities may be willing to do, whether it's legal or illegal, to seize information. Part of that is why it's so valuable to have all this information end-to-end encrypted. So even if somebody grabs stuff from our server or silently clones the hard drive of our server or anything like that, all these private Pursuances will have that information protected. So we'll have federation later, and we have some smart people involved, like Kevin Gallagher, who's just like a sysadmin expert, and we'll have like encrypted backups of data that we can access, so that even if something happens to a server, we can quickly revive it. Let's see. Somebody asked, do I have to register with an email? Can I use it anonymously? So you will not have to register with an email address at all if you don't want to. But in addition to that, I'm ensuring that the emails that we send out that are related to activity within the Pursuance system, none of those will include kind of privacy violating information, right? So you may get an email saying you've been mentioned in a Pursuance, and then you click a link, and then it takes you to that mention in a chat room where people are, say, discussing what needs to be done regarding a particular task someone's working on. Or you may get an email saying, you've been assigned a task, but that email will not say what the person's message was that you were mentioned in. It won't say, it won't say the what the title of the task is or anything about the task that you've been assigned. Nothing like that. So even by signing up with an email, we're making sure to have this sort of privacy enhancing features that go out via email. And the last question that I will, or second to last one I'll handle, when do you think the platform will launch as a fully featured alpha? So one important milestone that we're coming up on in about 7 weeks or so is Barrett and I will be giving a talk. I'll sort of be interviewing Barrett, and then we will, then I'll do the first public demo of the Pursuance system. So this is November 4th and 5th. That should be, I think it'll be live streamed. It will definitely be recorded. So we're going to be able to show that off. So that's a major milestone for us. So I'm motivating our awesome team of developers and designers to have many things ready, especially surrounding the task management features that we're ready for on November 4th. So that will be big. But by the end of the year, we will be inviting people to join the Pursuance system. Toward the end of this broadcast, we'll talk a little bit more about what some specific next steps are and how people can be one of the first people to be invited to the Pursuance system when we launch more broadly. But right now, we're currently kind of working with a few people that, like Barrett said, that we're choosing that we think would make great pursuances, and kind of leveraging the strengths of the people we know and the activists involved and journalists and whatnot who are excited about doing crowdsourced investigative journalism and so on. But yeah, to be part of that early group that gets invited, go to pursuanceproject.org and make sure you're part of the mailing list. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So Barrett, here's a kind of a two-part question here. I'll start answering a little piece of it, and then I'll give the rest to you. He said, beyond scale effect, how do your tools serve organizers better than what they're using now? So I mentioned some of that, a little bit of this earlier, where because of the end-to-end encryption, that is protecting people's data, protecting people's privacy and security. So Pursuance will be the only software in the world that provides task management and is open source and is end-to-end encrypted. Like, people just haven't built secure task management systems. So Annalise and Annalise, our director of operations, we went through basically every existing task management system in the world. Plus I and others have significant experience with using other task management systems. So making sure that we have something that has the kind of sophistication that we need to break stuff down into pieces and be able to say, hey, I'm stuck on this task, I need help, stuff like that, without making it too complex. We've kind of gotten rid of some of the bad ideas, some of the complexity, and come up with some of our own ideas in addition to harvesting good ideas from elsewhere. So there's various things that are unique, partially on the security side. There's things that sound basic, like just really quickly being able to create a task. You should be able to go into this kind of quick quick kind of creation mode, which I'm hoping to demo on November 4th, where you can have this kind of hierarchy of tasks. You can break things down into smaller pieces, assign them to different people, and so on. The gamification is definitely unique. But Barrett, any other comments you want to make about kind of what makes Pursuance unique?
Well, I mean, the main strength of it is kind of detailed in our framework presentation on pursuanceproject.org. There's a lot of other facets that we'll put in writing, sort of more easily explained in that format. But the bottom line is that when two people meet online, there's no pre-existing relationship, and there's no framework for them to figure out, are we going to start a group? How will it work? And if we bring on 100 people, what are their rights? So this is very much, at every level, this is very much in contrast to the amorphous system that we've been relying upon to get things done. And the fact that it's worked even in that amorphous way, I think very much indicates that anything that represents even a slight improvement over setting up an IRC channel and saying, hey, come in here, and then having a couple people who, for some arbitrary reason, have channel operator on that thing, and thereby kick people out or ban people, and thereby have this arbitrary power. Anything that's an improvement on that, either in terms of efficiency or in terms of sort of moral underpinnings, the sort of the civics of the question, is going to be a major catalyst for ensuring that more people get involved in successful activism and stay involved. We've seen too many people in the past just leave because they don't want to deal with these peripheral difficulties that come up. And there's so many people right now that because of what's been going on, because of the deterioration of our institutions and the making plain of the fundamental problems facing the Western republics, we have a huge constituency out there of people who would, if they had if they saw the people doing it, they saw that this was something that was going to happen, who would happily get involved in something like this. And so making it, setting up something that accommodates that can perpetually accommodate new recruits, that itself is an advantage. So beyond that, we have a number of ways within Pursuance's, some more sort of mundane frameworks and settings that can ensure that these things run efficiently, expand efficiently, that as they grow larger, they don't fall prey to the kind of lack of agility that institutions have. We ensure with a couple of different tweaks here and there in terms of how you can send messages and to who you can send them to, that as a Pursuance grows large, the people on the margins their ideas aren't going to be lost to people between them and the core founders, who may not be correct as them, may be in some cases inferior to them. As in with institutions, you always have a sort of middle management group that in some cases is not as clever, or maybe not right about a particular thing, whereas someone ostensibly lower them on the totem pole has a good idea, or has an objection to something, or has some piece of information. With the default setting on a Pursuance system is that anyone who joins a Pursuance has the right to send a message to anyone else on that Pursuance at any time. It could be information or an idea, or pointing out something that's going wrong somewhere elsewhere. And that person, it could be the founder, it could be someone else higher up, it could be anyone. The person who receives that message, if he finds it valuable, he can opt to renew that ability. So that person, can in the future also send another message to him if he has some other idea. And of course, if someone is sending, regularly fine ideas that he for some reason felt was not getting up quickly enough, not being implemented on the margins, the people with that power delegated to them to move people around are probably going to want to do so. Maybe give him, more access, move him somewhere else, connect him directly so they can send all of the stuff to them. Pursuances again are very customizable. They can take many different forms. You can kind of get a sense of that just by looking at the diagrams on the pursuanceproject.org website and kind of extrapolating from there on how you might design a Pursuance to do this, this, and this more efficiently. Who connects to who, how many people do a particular task, and who else they would be connected to. There's someone who does research. Do you want them connected also to somebody who's doing public relations directly, so that they can collaborate on a particular item that kind of connects those two things? There's any number of ways to do these, and as time goes on, the other major aspect of this that kind of does answer that question is that, as people find out structure, discover structures or particular pursuances, entire pursuances that do something well, they can submit that whole structure to the central sort of a library we have with notations saying, yes, this worked very well for this. We had this person who was set up this way. We had these options set, and it worked very well. So everyone who comes in the pursuance system or is interested in creating a pursuance or expanding his own will have access to the latest developments, the latest sort of the best practices that have been developed in this very sort of new field. You'll have people, just like with programmers, you'll have people who will enjoy putting together pursuances for different tasks, just based on how they think it might work out, and submitting those. So that's one of the sort of levels on which this system can be expected to evolve perpetually. You have pursuances getting better, figuring out better tactics. You have pursuances figuring out better means of setting themselves up and of growing and of delineating their structure. And you have, of course, more and more connections between pursuances over time as they find out where their common areas of action can be, that sort of thing. So you're going to have something that is vastly better than anything we currently have. So we have questions here. So is the aim in the ends to have all people playing a part in a pursuance and all pursuances running all necessary systems? We don't really have that specific of a end game for this. This is something that, to the extent that it works and to the extent that it brings on more and more of sort of even mainstream institutional society to start doing things within the system, this will be a sort of counter. It'll be an outside framework, something that runs parallel to all the states. And those involved in pursuances and in the system itself may have different long-term aims. There are some people who eventually want to see an entirely different structure governing the world. There are some people who want no one governing the world. There are some people who will want just reform. They want the systems that are in place to work better. They want to work within the system, but they want to do it from without the system. They want to better handle the politicking and the civic cooperation that republics require. And so, but you'll have these people generally agreeing on different issues. So you have people who are working against the drug war, people who are opposed to the state at all, and those who are just opposed to the state doing this one thing, but they have these same short-term goals. So the end result of all this is hard to predict. We hope that this system will be sort of the standard. The other hope is that someone else, that these principles and that these procedures will catch on, that other people will develop systems like this that maybe might be more successful than ours. But we have every intention of making this the gold standard and of having this grow till it has tens of thousands of very capable people all working towards working together to different ends. It could potentially someday, something like this, there's no reason why it shouldn't be used to govern people, to engage in a limited sort of a process democracy that serves as a alternative to nation states. But that's something that we're not really anticipating for right now. What we're looking at now is a conflict between structures that we've inherited and that are in many cases criminalized, and a process-based associational system of sort of self-governance that will counter those things, confront them, roll them back, reform them. Think of the pursuance system as scaffolding around a building. You can use it to repair parts of the building just on a limited basis. You can use it to replace parts of the building. You can use it to deconstruct the building slowly and with the intention of taking it down. You also have scaffolding with nets so that when the building crumbles, as they sometimes do, the pieces won't fall on you or others. But everyone can use the same scaffolding, even if their intent is very different, so long as they start with a basic, some areas of agreements on politics and on what their duties are as citizens. And by having this sort of broad agreements on, anti-police state, anti-drug war, anti-surveillance state, we ensure that they will have that shared agreement. That they can all be on the scaffolding at once, even if they're doing different things to different ultimate ends. How can plebes like me support the growth of the Pursuance Project? Someone else asked some similar questions. Basically, if I'm not a journalist, I'm not a programmer, I'm not a experienced activist, I don't really have any skills that are obviously necessary, helpful to this. How can I help? And the answer is yes. There's all kinds of things that will be needed that any clever, honest person can do within the system. Some examples are, you'll have journalists, again, as we talked about earlier, using this for crowdsourced journalism. They'll have networks of people who will submit him tips, or alternatively, when he's researching something, he'll ask them, go find out what you can about this. And you'll have 20, 30 people running around on the internet or making calls and basically trying to suss out details about a story that, again, the traditional process of journalism tends not to uncover. Anyone who's been covered by the press a lot, like I have, can see specifically how much error creeps in, not even by intent, but just because of the process being it's a very haphazard process. It looks very systematic from the outside sometimes, even among people who know that the press is flawed. But you really have to look at it very closely to see how broken it is. So that's one what we anticipate to be a major use of this. Others are NGOs that exist that want to come on here and they want to be able to do more fundraising. They want to be able to mobilize people to inform people. They want people helping with design. They want people helping with finding other individuals who might have certain talents to help them with whatever. All of those things are things that people will have to do. And just like with groups like Anonymous, and just like with any NGO that has people out there passing out flyers, there will be a place for those who have no formal background in anything, but are interested in working for these causes. And so if you can't think necessarily of something that you have an established skill that might allow you to do some particular function, that's not necessarily a problem. There is a great deal of grunt work, essentially, that remains to be done. A lot of what the system is intended to do is to allow a testing ground for more efficient and sort of those things we have not yet discovered about what the internet can do. Again, if we extrapolate from the last 10 years in which things have been developed that work, that have been proven to counter some of the problems we face, we can assume that there are other things yet to be devised. This system helps people with ideas to get them off the ground very quickly, get them tested, and disseminate them once they've been proven. Within that context, we need a lot of people to help them with that. Before I forget, we want to ask, we are obviously intent on recruiting as many people to apply for this as possible, so we have the largest possible pool of people to bring into the system. Part of doing that is putting out sort of visual graphics with our slogans and website and all that. If you have any predilection towards design, you've got your copy of MS Paint on you, and you would like to create some visual propaganda for us using one of our slogans or just using the Project PM symbol and the Project Pursuancesystem.org website, please do so and send it to and then mention at Pursuance Proj, that's Pursuance PROJ, or mention my Twitter handle, that's Barrett Brown _ on Twitter when you've created it, and we'll see it and we'll put it to use. Next question, where would you like to see the project in 5 years, in 10 years? Within 5 years, we expect to have dozens and dozens of NGOs and nonprofits attached to this using the Pursuance system to handle some of their existing operations, as well as to handle expanded operations that the Pursuance system makes possible, makes efficient. Groups that don't necessarily have a lot of resources, don't have any money to throw around or personnel to run things, but that we can help to establish pursuances with people who know how to do that, that can run things for them. We want to have tens of thousands of people, researchers, just regular people who are honest and have some skill or at least energy, working within hundreds and hundreds of civic pursuances, each dedicated to narrow, specific functions. We want to see those pursuances linked up in, one pursuance generally would be linked up with 5 or 6 others, perhaps sharing information in some cases sharing resources, in some cases following a common long-term plan. We want to see arising from that a superorganism of activism, of capable citizens who, were they to be collated in the right way, if they were to be organized, self-organized in the way the system allows, could serve as an actual opposition, a cogent opposition beyond anything we've seen. to all the institutions that right now tend to look overwhelming, tend to look, intractable. These things aren't intractable. It's just a matter of putting the right people in the right situations and putting out the right conception of what we can do. Once people see that conception, once people see it in action, they'll come and they'll get involved. You'll have access to people of higher station. You'll have access to more and more people with very specific skill sets, people with knowledge of particular government institutions, people with knowledge of different careers in different areas of the world, and they'll all be accessible, and they'll all be putting their information, their knowledge, to best possible use, and putting their skills to best possible use. We want to put all the people out there who could represent a vast, formidable constituency, and turn them into a constituency, and have them operating together in a loose but still vigorous fashion, operating as something contrary to the nation state, something supplementing the nation state, something outside and apart of nation states and corporations. Nation states and corporations and all these institutions have advantages because they have people, they have people arranged in a certain way. They don't really exist. They're not structures. They are ideas that people have accepted, and they put in motion different procedures by which they maintain themselves. It's like an organism. Or even a single cell is a collection of different elements that come together and live on and grow and breathe. These things will do the same. They'll do it in a way that we haven't really seen before, but which the internet now makes possible. What is it about Emma Goldman's activism that inspires you? You've mentioned before the great odds that others have overcome in the past. Emma Goldman, to me, is an example of someone who came here and recognized a sense of duty. She was an immigrant from Russia, came here, worked, as a seamstress, worked in factories back in the late 19th century at first. And at no point did she ever have this conception of that it wasn't her job to fight for the rights of others. None of the things that come into the heads of those who have done nothing would ever occur to her. She innately, I think, had the idea that she was duty bound to build up a movement where none existed, and to take risks, and to otherwise do those things that people before her had done to secure her rights. The vast majority of people in a republic, particularly one of ours, are essentially stealing. They're stealing the anguish and the sacrifice that others put in to creating what we have, what we still have. They're freeloaders in a civic sense. She was the exact opposite of that. She really had no obligation you can point to as someone who just come to this country to set about righting all of its wrongs, but she did so. And then she went to Russia and did the same thing. And then when things screwed up over there, and then the Soviet Union turned out to be worse than they expected, she objected to them. She and Alexander Berkman, but particularly she, were, to me, icons. They're people that I can think about and say, well, these people made these right choices. I have the choice to either not follow through on those things and to just enjoy myself and enjoy the fruits of their labors and labors of others like them, or to give something back. And if I want to give something back, well, I need to think about what the best way to do that is. What will most vastly affect situation as I found it. And the Pursuance system, after 9 years of thought and self-education and experience, to me, it is the best way of doing that. So you can never really make a geometrical proof, a logical proof as to why you are duty bound to do these things. You really have to phrase it in such a sense as that you have to decide what kind of person that you're going to be, and it's best to keep in mind that there are other people out there who faced much greater struggles and greater opposition than we did, who did not make excuses in the way. They weren't on Twitter saying, "Oh, they're all crooked. It'll always be the same thing. Always be the same way. There's nothing to do." because all those things are false. Anyone who knows history knows that those things are false, that there have been very, very different societies. There have been different circumstances, even in this country's history, even in the past few decades, and that these things are not intractable. These forces, these sort of systems, they come out of common attributes of mankind, but mankind is very, very adaptable and has lived under different circumstances. And they have done so because at some point, certain people decided those circumstances should exist, and they did those things necessary to make them exist. And now it's our turn. I don't think we have any more questions. Oh, no, we do. Why have you called this the age of non-state actors? As of, around the turn of the century, you started seeing, because of technology and because of the information age, because of the ability conferred by the internet for any individual to collaborate with any other individual on the planet, without going through an institution or a government, you've seen the potential there, at the very least, for someone to build up something very quickly out of nothing in ways that would have been unimaginable before. States, due to the fact of geography and the fact of early mankind's kind of regionalism, it's necessary regionalism, due to there being no communications from region to region at the dawn of civilization. Nation states, local powers were essentially, whatever organized was it. That was the institution. And there was always, potential for collaboration outside that institution. You always had other groups. You had gangs and bandits and, parties and sort of revolutionaries. But you always had the advantage on the side of the institutions. That is less the case now. We don't know. We've seen very firm examples of non-state actors being able to assemble and to combat institutions in ways that are very new and in some cases very effective. From that, we can extrapolate that there will be more of this, and that we will devise additional tactics that work even better and form different associations that will grow faster and prove to be more resilient. We're very early on in the information age. The internet, in historical terms, just came about very recently, and we know very little about what it can do. You already have, of course, people, 5 or 6 years ago, kind of pointing to the promises that were made at the beginning of the internet in the early 90s and saying, oh, these things didn't happen. Well, that's all very well and good, but it's only been a few years. And you don't know, once you've invented gunpowder or the printing press, you're not yet able to grasp the implications of what that will lead to. In this case, we have something that transcends most of our past technologies, something that is so fundamental to civics because it redefines the manner by which civics can be conducted. That's a vast environmental change, and those creatures, those institutions that grew up in a different environment are now at a disadvantage, potentially, to the extent that we take full advantage of our advantage, which is that we have a great deal of talent and numbers wrapped up in those people around the world who have the desire and have the skills and the ability to combat these institutions in new ways. Another question, what options would there be for a person or group to indicate what skills they can offer, what tasks they can accomplish, or what roles they can fill? There's a couple different ways they'll be able to do this. You can create a sort of profile within the system that makes it visible that you have these skills or claim to have these skills. Meanwhile, there's a couple of other, aside from that, there are other methods. And actually, I think Steve can better address this because he's designing a lot of these systems here. So I'm going to mute myself and let him go into more of those specifics.
Sure, thank you, Barrett. So yeah, just to add on to that a bit, what options will there be for groups to indicate what skills they have? So so each person will have a profile which is specific to a pursuance. We think also people have kind of like a default kind of public, if they want, profile, but being able to have basically a bunch of keywords that indicate what your skills are is going to be really powerful. So one unique aspect of the pursuance system that I should mention is that be able to say, okay, here's something that I think we need to do. Here's a good idea. and here's the skills that are necessary to perform this task. Being able to just say, hey, Pursuance system, find the right people, find preferably the optimal person within the pursuance to perform that task. So you don't have to be a connector. You don't have to know everyone and have memorized the skill sets of all these people in the world in order to get stuff done, in order to be part of this effective organization that we call pursuances. So being able to assign tasks based on skill set is unique. And so one of the things I thought we could close with before some very final comments from Barrett, perhaps, is to say that for everyone who signs up at pursuanceproject.org, you will have the opportunity to be one of the early people that joins the Pursuance system. And there's a brilliant idea that was thought up by our international coordinator, Ray Johansson, who's on our board and also on the board of Pirate Party International. He realized that that starting very soon, not waiting until like after Pursuance has launched, but starting very soon to now, inviting people from our mailing list to and other people and activists that we and nonprofits and journalists that we know, going to them and saying, hey, fill out this form, say what your skills are, say what your interests are, and that way we can have this large pool of people who are energetic, who are excited to change the world in the ways that they care about, or some other way, or doing research for journalists that they want to aid. Being able to specify those skills ahead of time and be part of this pool that all of these groups can draw from if they choose to, right? If you want to have like a very, very closed down group and just invite people that you've known for 10 years within your pursuance, you're able to do that. That's fine. But starting soon, we will invite people to kind of fill out this kind of profile and say what they have to offer, what they'd be interested in contributing to, sort of by keyword, by sort of category of missions that people have, things that they want to achieve, and therefore which kinds of pursuances it might make sense to invite them to. So with that, one small announcement. In preparation for this event, the Pursuance Project Twitter account just passed 1,000 Twitter followers. So we're trying to use the Pursuance hashtag, so hashtag Pursuance, for the events that we do and to talk about pursuance-related things in general. So please feel free to use that and continue telling people to go to pursuanceproject.org. Continue telling people to follow us on Twitter, and that helps extend our reach, of course, and helps talk about the Pursuance system. And once we invite the early people and we're having these success stories, we'll be bragging about those via these various mediums. So that will be awesome. Okay, I think that's all my comments for now. So, but the main thing I wanted to say: pursuanceproject.org. Sign up, and then we will reach out to you, and you can create a profile and be part of this pool that pursuances are drawing from. So, with that, Barrett, any other last comments? I think we're good as far as questions go. There was a couple other things with a lot of overlap with questions that we have answered.
Thank you very much.
Any final thoughts?
Yes. So take a look at the pursuanceproject.org, look at the framework, see how the system works if you haven't already. Go to the link, it should be on the bottom of this YouTube as well, under the description, to the announcement, and see some of the background, some of the thinking behind this. And think about what your role is going to be in the 21st century. Think about whether or not you have some duty and some ability to turn back what's happening, because others have done it for you throughout history. What we have didn't just fall here. It was fought for. We're not asking you to fight. We're not asking you to storm the beaches of Normandy. We're asking people to consider what abilities they might have that they might be willing to contribute, a couple hours a week to something you yourself control, or something that you join knowing that it's something that you believe in. We're going to make this a lot easier for everybody. activism and synchronization in general, civic collaboration. We're going to make it easier to do the things that are already being done and the things that should be done. And we're going to have all the people who are doing all these things working with one environment, working in a way where they can better assess the alliances that they can make, that they should make, and better do the things that unless we do them, just won't happen. That has to be the mentality going forward. There's been too much sort of cowardice dressed up as cynicism, among people our age, and there's been a lot of frankly failures among people older than us over the past several decades in the U.S. and elsewhere, and it's time to start rolling those things back. If I didn't think this was entirely viable, if I wasn't entirely certain that within 10 years we will be confronting states in a way that will go well beyond what we've seen before in the last 10 years with Anonymous and WikiLeaks and elsewhere, then I wouldn't have committed myself to this project. But I believe enough in this, and I believe enough in the people who have gotten involved to be fairly certain that we're going to take the war back to the ones who started it over time, and you're going to help us, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much for watching and for your questions. And again, please sign up at pursuanceproject.org so that we can begin doing the things that need to be done. Thank you.